What's up guys, Ergo here again with some more Diablo 4 news. Blizzard just posted the patch notes for Season 3, Season of the Construct, so I'm going to be going over that today. I'm not going to go over the entire patch notes, just the things I find the most interesting, but I'll have the patch notes linked in the description below so you can check them out yourself as well. To start off, they did nerf Overpower like they said they were going to in the stream yesterday. It looks like they cut the scaling with Fortify and your base life in half. So instead of 2% overpower damage per 1% of Fortify and base life, it's now 1% per. So it's just a 1-to-1 ratio now. Barbarian's new unique looks interesting. It's a ring that increases Rend's duration and makes your brawling skills apply 2 stacks of the Rend bleed every 4 seconds. So that could be pretty interesting, trying to do like a brawling Rend build. The only thing is that with the 4-second cooldown, it doesn't incentivize having a bunch of the brawling skills on your bar, because it's not like you can just spam them out to get a ton of stacks up. But it does mean that you could do the common ground stomp leap combo so that you have all that fury generation, and then that'll make it so that when you leap into packs to start a fight, you immediately apply Rend to everything. So that would be really good for sure. And then the new Barbarian aspect is Aspect of Sundered Ground. It's an offensive aspect, and it makes so that every 25 seconds your upheaval is guaranteed to overpower and it deals extra damage. And then the cooldown for that is reduced whenever you overpower your upheavals on a boss or an elite. So that's pretty good for an upheaval build. Upheaval could use some love, so that's good to see. One of the big things I'm really excited for with Barbarian is the charge changes. Its damage was increased by 900%. And even more interestingly, honestly, is the fact that they're changing it so that the power charge enhancement that normally makes it so that you reduce the cooldown of charge by impacting enemies into terrain no longer requires the terrain impact. You just have to hit enemies with charge now. So that's a very nice change. That means your charge is going to have a significantly shorter cooldown now. And then they buffed Leap's damage a little bit. The key passive buffs that they promised us were a little disappointing. The increased duration for Walking Arsenal is nice to see, and the attack speed bonus is pretty nice also, so that's really good. But Unconstrained just getting a damage bonus increase is pretty boring, honestly, although I guess that's kind of to be expected. And then Gushing Wounds just got a damage increase as well, which, barring completely reworking the key passive, that's kind of all they can really do to it to make it better. So hopefully that's enough to make it worth using on bleed builds. Honestly, as long as these changes are good enough that we can justify taking something other than Unbridled Rage for some builds, then this is good. Because Unbridled Rage is just so powerful. It's such a boring key passive because it's just more damage and your abilities cost more. And it's a lot more damage, which is fun, but like Walking Arsenal to me is the most interesting key passive far and away because it takes the most thought. And hopefully having the increased attack speed on it will help a lot with making that worth taking. Then Unconstrained is technically a bit boring, like I said before, but Berserking is used in a lot of builds, so having the damage while Berserking bonus increased up to 100%, that's really good. Because that means since Berserking is multiplicative, with Unrestrained you deal double damage. So that's pretty huge actually. The 60% increase was already pretty good, but double damage is double damage. I will definitely be toying around with Unconstrained in the new season. I'll definitely be trying that out. Hopefully it competes well with Unbridled Rage. The change to the Martial Glyph is also nice to see. They're shifting it over to cooldown reduction for non-shout skills instead of for other shouts. And then they're making it higher. They're making it 4-second reduction as well. So that's pretty nice to see. That de-incentivizes the all 3 shouts builds, which is good. It's fine that those builds exist, but them being the optimal build is pretty frustrating for people who don't enjoy that, because it is fairly boring having 3 buttons essentially be the same thing. But this is a pretty nice way to do it though, because now if there's people who want to have multiple shouts, they can still do that. They could have 3 shouts and an ultimate, and then just every time they spam their 3 shouts, their ultimate gets 12 seconds off its cooldown. I mean, that's an interesting idea. That's certainly something that I think some people will probably try. I don't think it'll be optimal, but there will be people who try it for sure. Another nerf to the multi-shout build is they made it so that you can only have the fury per second from aspect of echoing fury from 1 shout at a time, but they made it so that it's 3 times as high, just about, not quite, on the low end. So it went from 2 to 4 fury per second per shout to 6 to 10 fury per second while any shout is active. So it's not quite equivalent, but it's close enough. And now you only have to have 1 shout on your bar if you want to have it. I like that a lot. I might actually start running shouts now. I've been pretty stubborn lately because I just dislike the multi-shout build so much. So I've been running brawling skills, and it always felt kind of pointless to run even 1 shout if you're not going all in on shouts. So I haven't been running shouts. But now with aspect of echoing fury, I can get the full benefit of it from just having 1 shout in my build. So I might actually start running 1 shout in my build now. Probably Warcry, or maybe, well, it depends. It depends what I need. Either Warcry if I am plenty tanky, or Rallying Cry if I'm feeling squishy where I'm at. I also nerfed down a couple of the aspects that have to do with charge, because they had pretty high multipliers on them. The Brawler's offensive aspect and the Ancestral Charge aspect both had fairly high damage multipliers on them because Charge's damage was so low before. So they brought those down, and I'm sure overall they'll still deal a lot more damage because of the buffs to Charge. So I'm going to be trying those out at some point as well. A charge-based build sounds interesting to me. Druid's new unique is the Unsung Ascetics Wraps, which gives your lightning strikes an extra, or which gives your lightning storm 1 extra strike every time it grows, and if it crits, it also does an extra strike and deals more damage. It's pretty cool. They showed that off in the stream yesterday, and it looked like fun. I've never done a lightning storm build myself before, but I'll probably give it a try some point this season. And then their new aspect is a utility aspect, and makes it so that when your rabies applies its poison, its cooldown is reduced, which is tripled against elites. I don't know much about how rabies works. I haven't done a werewolf build yet, but I'm sure that's pretty good. From what I understand, if you're doing a werewolf poison build, rabies is your main ability, so getting cooldown reduction on that is definitely good. And then Druid got a few various buffs to their werewolf abilities, and then a couple of their, and then a buff to their lightning ultimate, which is Cataclysm. Got some damage buffs and an increase to its vulnerable duration. They also buffed some of the spirit boons, which are mostly inconsequential, like thorns is whatever. I mean, that is a very high amount of thorns, over 4,000 thorns. So that could be something to potentially build around, although I kind of doubt it. Doubling the increase of spirit from stag from 10 to 20 is nice. But the real big one here is they changed the critical strike damage bonus from Avian Wrath from multiplicative to, or from additive to multiplicative, which is huge. Anytime we have more sources of multiplicative damage increases is always nice to see. Their new unique is the Mutilator Plate, which I assume is a chest piece. It says that you are considered Bloodlanced, which I haven't interacted with Bloodlance builds. I don't know if Bloodlanced is a new thing, or if it's just something, or if it's a status effect that's been in the game. But it says that you are Bloodlanced, and when Bloodlance would deal damage to you, it instead fortifies you for 1 to 2% of your max life, and it has a chance to spawn a Blood Orb. And then Bloodlance also does more damage multiplicatively. So that's kind of cool. It's like a defensive unique, it sounds like. I'm not sure what Bloodlanced means, though. And then their new aspect, Shattered Spirits aspect, is an offensive aspect, and it just makes it so that you do a Bone Nova around you whenever you cast Bone Spirit, essentially, and each enemy hit gives you some essence. So that sounds kind of neat. Traditionally, I've always enjoyed the Nova builds for Necromancers in the other games, so seeing a new type of Nova that you can get is nice to see. They did nerf Blighted Corpse Explosions dot damage, which is kind of sad because I really enjoyed doing the explodey Infinimist build, but most of your damage from that comes from Shadow Blight anyways, and they didn't touch the tick rate for Blighted Corpse Explosion. They just nerfed its damage. So the damage shouldn't be too nerfed for the Infinimist build, since most of our damage came from Shadow Blight anyways. But we will probably feel it, because a lot of our damage did come from the Corpse Explosion dot too. I'm not surprised, really, though, that they nerfed it, because it's a pretty powerful build. Because it's like, it's a build where you're almost constantly immune to damage, and it does a shitload of damage. So it's not too surprising that it caught a nerf, to be honest. I'm just glad they nerfed the damage rather than the uptime of the mist. I'd much rather they nerf the damage, for sure. Which is they probably went for that because, for one thing, if you nerfed the uptime of the mist, that would kind of kill the build. And I don't think they want to kill builds. But it's also not like you get it for free. You have to specifically build for the cooldown reduction from your curse. And you also have to gear for cooldown reduction on your gear to actually have full uptime. So it's not like you just like slot in a couple of passives in your tree and then suddenly you have permanent uptime. So that's probably why they didn't nerf that, since it actually takes effort. Since it actually takes effort. They also put vulnerable onto decompose, which is interesting, instead of it just giving you a multiplicative damage increase while channeling it. I probably still won't ever use it because I don't really like channeled abilities that you can't move while you're channeling. I don't like getting stuck standing still for too long. It's bad enough when you're melee and you have to stop to melee things, but I can deal with that. But standing there and channeling for decompose or for incinerate on Sorc, I don't like that personally. But for people who like this kind of ability, this is probably a good change, to be honest. Blood Mist did also catch a bit of a defensive nerf, though. Not really one that's super effective for the Infinimist build, because you're just spending most of your time in mist form anyways. But what they did is they took the Fortify generation off of Blood Mist, and they made it so that you get a crit chance buff for a few seconds after Blood Mist ends. So that is very good for the Infinimist build, but it nerfs the defenses of non-Infinimist builds a little bit because they don't have permanent uptime on their mist, so they don't really benefit. They were the ones that really benefited from the Fortify you used to get from it. So this is just a buff for Infinimist. That's nice to see. And then, of course, in yesterday's stream, they talked about this. They made it so that Bone Prison friendly players and your minions can just walk through Bone Prison walls now, which is huge, because you just could not use Bone Prison if you were a minion build. You were just shooting yourself in the foot if you did that. They also made it so that now the enhanced version of Bone Prison is the one that makes every enemy inside of it vulnerable. So now you only have to invest 2 points in Bone Prison if you really want just the vulnerable from it. They also changed the Bone Prison passive that fortified you for each enemy. They changed it to cooldown reduction for each enemy caught in it for all of your other cooldowns, for all of your active cooldowns. That's an interesting change. It's just switches it essentially from a defensive choice to a more utility choice. So now you're choosing between resources or cooldown. That is actually a pretty interesting choice, to be honest. And then our minions got a few changes. The big ones are all of the golems' attacks cleave now. Bone Golem, when it taunts, it gains 70% of your armor as thorns, so it'll taunt things and then just murder them. Bone Mages now fortify based on your max life instead of your base life, which is essentially just a bug fix at this point, because they were supposed to change that for all fortify things last season, and I guess they just overlooked this. And then now the Skeleton Priest does more healing. It's 40% over 8 seconds instead of 25%. Which I think is I think that reverts the nerf they did in season 2, which I didn't really feel the nerf that much, to be honest, when I was playing my minion Necro. So this will just make your minions even tankier. And then this is a huge change for the Cult Leader Paragon node. They're changing it from your minions deal 15% multiplicative increased damage per minion type to your minions deal 10% multiplicative increased damage for each 20% of attack speed bonus they have. So it scales further. It starts lower, but it scales further. So this is technically an early game nerf for minion builds, but it gives them more late game scaling. So I'm kind of happy to see that, mostly because early game, you can just lean into the golems anyway, because the golems have a lot of early game damage. And now because you don't have to have all of your minion types out in order to maximize this bonus, you can also use some of your sacrifice buffs early game to kind of give yourself a bit more power until you have enough extra attack speed to really start scaling this. And then they changed the golem glyph to be 25% damage instead of 25% health. And then there's the aspect of swelling curse change that they showed us in the stream yesterday. It just makes it so that it no longer scales with distance traveled and instead just has an increased crit chance. You gain max essence for each enemy hit so that you can make your further bone spirits even stronger, since bone spirit scales with how much essence you spent on it. It spends all of your essence and then deals increased damage based on that essence cost. And then they changed around the Iron Maiden aspect, which is the torturous aspect. Makes Iron Maiden a darkness skill and deals shadow damage, as well as the original stun effect that it had. So this will be a pretty interesting choice for Shadow Blight builds, because that means now you have to choose between either Iron Maiden or Decrepify for your Shadow Blight builds. If you're running Bone Storm, especially since Bone Storm has so many individual hits, because you can go Iron Maiden with Torturous Aspect, and that'll make your Iron Maiden hits stack up your Shadow Blight. So when you pop your Bone Storm and all your minions are hitting things, they're proccing Iron Maiden hits, which are building up your Shadow Blight. So your Shadow Blight's going to build up a lot faster. Or you could go Decrepify, like what most people currently do, and you take the cooldown reduction per hit passive that it has, so that you can have significantly higher uptime on your Bone Storm. So it just kind of depends on the build you're doing. Like the Infinimist build won't ever use this because they're reliant on the cooldown reduction from Decrepify in order to keep up their Blood Mist and their Bone Storm. But minion-based builds might actually get more benefit out of Iron Maiden because of all of your minions also hitting it. Their new item is Beastfall Boots. It just makes it so that when you use an ultimate, your next core skill spends all of your energy and deals increased damage based on that energy. And then using any of your cooldowns also gives you 5 energy. Their new aspect is the resistant assailants aspect, which is a defensive aspect. And whenever you break concealment, you get 10% resistance and max resistance to all elements for a few seconds. And killing elites reduces concealment's cooldown. Those are pretty interesting. The aspect is kind of whatever. It's probably okay, but the boots, the unique boots, are really interesting actually, because you could build around having just like 2 really big hits, really big hit with your ultimate, and then a really big hit with a core skill. So that could make for some interesting build choices. And I haven't played Rogue a ton yet, so I don't know rogues super well in order to really be able to go in depth to most of their changes. But the standout things seem to be that they've buffed up cold imbuement and nerfed poison imbuement. So with Pen Shot, they essentially swapped the 10% increased damage per enemy pierced and the 20% increased crit chance if you hit at least 3 enemies with each other. And then they cut down the 20% to 10%. And then they cut the 20% in half, made half of it baseline and half of it from the proc. So that's a pretty nice change, because that makes Pen Shot a little bit less reliant on having to hit multiple enemies. It at least will get some benefit if you're only hitting one enemy like a boss. And then they changed the precision key passive. They made it so that each marksman skill cast grants you a stack, and then if that crits, it grants you 2 stacks instead. When you reach 6 stacks, your next marksman, core, or ultimate skill is guaranteed to crit with an extra 50% multiplier on it, and it consumes all the stacks. And then it further scales with 15% multiplier based on your critical strike damage bonus. So there's a lot of multiplicative bonuses on there, which is nice. They also nerfed Blade Dancer's aspect for twisting blades. They reduced the number of hits from 2 to 3. They said that this was just to properly match the visuals of the animation, but I mean, it also needed a nerf because it's been pretty dominant since the game came out, honestly. So yeah, it was about due for a nerf. Yeah, it's actually better. Technically, this is a bit of a buff because they made it so that the orbiting damage isn't based on the distance of the return anymore. It's just the damage of the return now. They gave Sky Hunter some more crit damage baseline as well as increasing the actual affix on it as well. And then they just made it work better with the changes to precision. Hopefully that makes it better. Then they just changed Eagle Horn so that it makes penetrating shot always apply vulnerable. And then every fourth cast bounces off the walls and such for extra damage, instead of it being the other way around where your penetrating shot always had a chance to bounce off walls, and then every 5th cast or every 5th enemy hit will make your next one apply vuln. So that's a good change. Having the vulnerable be more consistent in the bounces, the more variable thing is better. Now, Sorcerer, one of the big things I'm really looking forward to with Sorcerer is their new unique, which is a helmet, Starfall Coronet. Makes your Meteor now have 2 charges with a cooldown instead of a mana cost, and it drops 3 extra Meteors, and also makes your Meteor enchantment, which gives you a chance to drop a Meteor when your other abilities deal damage, and the enhanced Meteor drop, which makes it so that if your Meteor hits at least 3 enemies, it drops an additional Meteor. It makes those 2 things each drop an extra Meteor themselves. So this sounds really cool because you're going to be able to have like Meteor showers just constantly raining down on enemies, especially because you can combine it with you take the Meteor enhancement or the Meteor enchantment, the chance for Meteors to drop when you deal damage, and you combine it with the Firewall enchantment that makes it so that your burning damage has a chance to cast Firewall. And then you use Firewall as your main ability as well as Meteor. You have a bunch of Firewalls going, constantly taking damage, spawning more Fireballs or Firewalls that all have a chance to drop Meteors. So you'll just be dropping Meteors constantly. I think it'll be really cool. It's going to look awesome. I really hope that this unique isn't too rare so that I definitely get the chance to try it out. I'm really excited for this one. And then their new aspect is Aspect of Shredding Blades. It's a defensive aspect, and it increases Ice Blade's chance to apply vulnerable, and the vulnerable duration is longer. And you also get multiplicative vuln damage just passively. And then the main other big change, especially in regards to the Meteor build that I want to try, is Burning Instinct. They made it so that you get 1% multiplicative damage, burning damage per 25 intelligence instead of 75 intelligence. So that's a huge buff to that. That'll be a massive damage increase. I'm actually probably going to go Sorc as my first character for the first time. They also nerfed the Aspect of Shattered Stars, which is the Meteor also brings down meteorites aspect. They brought down the damage on that a little bit just to compensate for the fact that we're going to be having so many more meteors with the unique. That makes sense because it'd probably be too strong if they didn't do that. They went over yesterday the Helltide changes, which is just Helltide is up for 55 minutes every hour and then down for 5 minutes just so it can reset. So that's really nice to see. That'll make farming I think it's called Living Steel for fighting Grigor. That'll make that a lot easier. And then they made it so that the Distilled Fear, which is the item you get from Nightmare Dungeons in order to fight the Beast in Ice, once you start doing tier 3 or tier 30 Nightmare Dungeons and up, you have guaranteed 1. And then every 10 tiers after that, you have a chance to get an extra 1 to drop. And then by the time you hit tier 90, you'll have a guaranteed 3 Distilled Fears every Nightmare Dungeon. So that's huge. That makes farming That's going to make farming Duriel himself a lot easier, because getting the pieces for Varshan is already pretty easy, and getting the pieces for Grigwar is easy, and it's just easier now. Although it'll probably still be as annoying as it was. It's just easier to not miss it. But the Beast in Ice was the one that was just like pure RNG. You just had to hope it dropped, and you could get really unlucky. So it's nice to have that be a bit more deterministic. I really like to see that. And they're moving Scattered Prisms from dropping from elites. They still drop from elites, but they nerfed the amount. And then they're putting them in Legion event chests. So this is them just trying to force us to do Legion events now. I guess not many people have been doing them, and they didn't like that, so now they're forcing us to do them. I mean, we'll have to see what the drop rate from elites is like. Maybe it'll be fine and we won't have to, but most likely this is going to make it so we have to do Legion events when we want to do crafting. They also increased the material cap from 99,999 to 999,999, so that's good. I was still hitting the material cap pretty consistently in season 2, so this will be nice to see. I'm sure we'll still pretty consistently hit it if we're playing a lot, but it's still good, a very good change. They buffed the Avarice world boss because they made the treasure goblins he spawned actual treasure goblins with loot equivalent to the normal treasure goblin, which I always thought it was really weird that they didn't. Like, that just felt like a blatant oversight to me. So I'm glad they changed that. That's a good change. And they made it so that tier 3 and tier 4 world boss weekly caches can drop unique items. Objectively good change. It's always good to have more sources of unique items. And then they capped the amount of item level you can get on world bosses now. So the previous cap was plus 100 to both the minimum item level and the maximum item level. Now it's plus 65 to the minimum item level and plus 25 to the maximum item level. And it scales with your character's level, I believe. They also nerfed the item level of things that drop from the various bosses, the non-Uber bosses. But Uber Duriel still drops only 925. And then they retooled the scaling for item level drops for Nightmare Dungeons as well. So once you hit Dungeon tier 90 or higher, you're guaranteed 925 item level gear to drop at that point. They made it so that Uber uniques can be transmogged. So I guess that's a good change. Some of the Uber uniques look really cool. And some people really, really get into transmogging. So that is a good change. Oh, and they did make it so that all events that you can see on the world map, their timers will show on the world map. So that is definitely a great change as well. And then that respec change that they talked about a little bit previously, they gave us a little bit more information on that. It sounds like essentially the way it's going to work is you can like respec, you can select multiple things that you're going to respec, and then you'll like temporarily take the points out of them, and then you can take those temporary points and put them into something else. And then I assume you click a confirm button and then it just does it for you. So you don't have to do each individual, you don't have to confirm every time you unspec something, which is really annoying. So that'll make that a little bit smoother. And then the main notable things in the bug fixes is them fixing Hammer of the Ancients always having the Violent Hammer of the Ancients upgrade, even if you had selected the Furious upgrade. So they fixed that, and then they fixed the Ball Lightning bug. They didn't say what the bug was, but they said that it was causing it to do significantly unintended damage. And they fixed that, so it's not doing that anymore. So the Ball Lightning build's not going to be nearly as good as it was. I'm sure it'll probably still be pretty good, but it won't be bugged anymore. Then the rest of the bug fixes are pretty standard stuff. But that's mostly it for the patch notes. That's all the stuff I found super interesting. I'm sure there's a few things I glossed over, especially on like the rogues and the druids, because I don't really play them, so I don't have a deep understanding of a lot of their skills. But if there's anything that you guys wanted to go over more, I'll have the notes linked down below so you guys can check them out yourself. And if there's anything major that I missed, then let me know. Let me know down in the comments, because I want to make sure I'm getting everything. But I'm pretty happy with these notes. A lot of the class changes sound really cool. Like I said before, I'm really excited for the Meteor build on Sorc, so I'm probably going to be giving that a try. I played a Firewall Sorc a little bit in Season 2, but I didn't get super far on it because it was like my third character, so I was kind of starting to get burnt out on the season by that point. But I am definitely looking forward to trying that out. There's a good chance that'll be my first character. If it's not, then I'll probably do some kind of barb. My main character last season was a double swing barb, and that was a lot of fun. So I might consider that as well. But we'll have to see. But let me know what you guys think about the patch notes. They're pretty cool. If you want to keep up with more Diablo 4 news, like and subscribe. I'll be putting out videos whenever there's new stuff to talk about. I'm also considering streaming when the season goes live over at twitch.tv/Ergor. And here as well. I multi-stream to YouTube as well. So I'll probably post to Twitter if I'm going to go live. I haven't decided for sure if I want to stream it live or if I want to just get some footage and make a video for you guys. But I'll make a decision ahead of time and let y'all know. But thanks for watching. I appreciate it. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.